The world doesn't collapse all at once. It cracks, slowly. It starts with wars that spread beyond their borders, energy growing scarcer by the day, prices climbing without mercy, and debt piling up in silence, like a time bomb no one dares to touch. 2026 is not just another year. It is the moment where every major global crisis collides at the same time. And behind all this chaos, something far larger is being built. Something that was planned long before any of us noticed. It's called the Great Reset 2030. For decades, conflicts between nations were managed through diplomacy, proxy wars, economic pressure. But that era is over. Major powers are now engaging in direct, open military confrontation, armed with technology more devastating than anything used before. The hottest flashpoint, the Middle East. The United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated military operation against Iran, called Operation Epic Fury by the Americans and Operation the Roaring Lion by Israel. The objectives were clear: destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, cripple its missile production, and neutralize its naval strength. The scale of it echoed the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Stealth aircraft, long-range missiles, tens of thousands of troops deployed to the region, hundreds, possibly thousands, of strategic targets struck within days. Iran's supreme leader was reported killed. A power vacuum opened, but not for long. His son stepped in, and he came in harder, more militant, and with zero interest in compromise. Iran hit back with asymmetric warfare. Thousands of drones and hundreds of missiles launched not only at Israel, but at American military bases and critical infrastructure across the Gulf, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, and Bahrain. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Eastern Europe remained a war zone. The Russia-Ukraine conflict ground on, and as America's attention shifted to the Middle East, Russia seized the opportunity to push harder. Attacks intensified. Russian forces strengthened their position, and economically, Russia was actually winning. Every spike in global oil prices filled the Russian war chest, enough to keep their military machine running, despite Western sanctions. NATO Secretary General issued a stark warning: European energy infrastructure could be the next target if the conflict continued to escalate. Two pressure points, the Middle East and Eastern Europe, now feeding each other, and the shockwave was spreading fast. The fastest and most painful consequence of these conflicts wasn't felt on the battlefield. It was felt at the pump, in grocery stores, in power bills. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway in the Persian Gulf, carries approximately 20 million barrels of crude oil every single day. Nearly 20% of the world's total energy supply passes through it. Iran blockaded it, and the world felt it immediately. Brent crude, which had been sitting around $72 per barrel, surged to $126 per barrel within weeks. The International Energy Agency released 400 million barrels from strategic reserves in response. But it was a band-aid on a hemorrhage. Refineries still couldn't get supply. And when they could, they paid a brutal price for it. The ripple effect moved through every layer of the economy. Natural gas in Europe jumped over 40%. Fertilizer prices surged more than 30%. Aviation fuel briefly doubled, and every single one of those costs eventually landed on ordinary people. Attacks on Qatar's LNG complex deepened the crisis. Roughly 17% of global gas export capacity was disrupted. Repairs are estimated to take up to 5 years. For Europe, already desperate to replace Russian gas, this was a catastrophe. And the ones hit hardest were the ones least able to absorb the blow. Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, Zambia, Syria. Nations that depend heavily on imported energy and food now faced a pressure with no easy exit. Fertilizer prices up, production costs soaring, food prices following, purchasing power slowly disappearing. Behind the energy crisis lurks another time bomb, quieter, but just as dangerous. Global debt. A report from the Institute of International Finance in early 2026 revealed a figure that is almost impossible to comprehend. Total global debt has reached $348.3 trillion. That is 308% of the entire world's GDP. In other words, the world owes more than 3 times the total value of every product and service produced by every human being on Earth in an entire year. The United States, government debt already at 123% of GDP. France, 113%. Italy, 135%. Japan carries the heaviest burden, 236% of its own GDP. Its central bank is trapped. Lower rates and the currency collapses. Raise rates and the debt burden becomes unbearable. The IMF warned of a debt wall, over $9 trillion in obligations that must be repaid in 2026 alone. What makes this crisis different from 2008 is the scale of corporate debt. Companies borrowed massively to bet on AI and clean energy, investments that are largely speculative. Expensive data centers, ambitious green infrastructure projects, built on the assumption that profits would follow. If those profits don't materialize, the correction could be severe. And when high interest rates, surging energy costs, and collapsing consumer purchasing power hit simultaneously, what forms is a scenario far more dangerous than the 2008 financial crisis. Faced with pressure from every direction, nations had no choice but to act, and act fast. Japan moved decisively. Its carbon trading program became fully mandatory. Companies in heavy industry were forced to either invest in energy-efficient technology or pay enormous penalties. The government poured resources into renewables, efficient data infrastructure, and next-generation nuclear power. Thailand lost waves of tourists from Europe and the Middle East almost overnight. The strategy pivoted toward regional Asian tourism, medical travel, and wellness tourism targeting older visitors. Hotels in Bangkok slashed prices to stay viable. In Cuba, electricity became a luxury, not a guarantee. Rolling blackouts. Factories shut. Schools disrupted. A country already dependent on fuel imports, now running on almost nothing. The Philippines faced skyrocketing power bills. Colombia began rationing energy in certain sectors, redirecting supply to essential needs. 3 very different countries, 3 very different crises, but one identical signal. When energy is disrupted, everything follows. The economy slows, movement stops, social pressure builds. And when nations start declaring energy emergencies, that is not the end of the story. That is the warning shot for what comes next. And here is where everything connects. 2030 is not just a UN development deadline. It has become a countdown, the target date for a fundamentally new global system being constructed on top of this crisis. That system rests on 2 pillars. First, digital identity. Physical documents are being phased out. In their place, a digital identity linked directly to the individual. Every credential, every service access point, every transaction history stored in a centralized system. The United Kingdom planned a program called the Brit Card, mandatory for employment and public services. It faced massive public backlash and was ultimately scrapped as a requirement. But the infrastructure, still operational, still running. The direction hasn't changed. Digital identity is being normalized, quietly, steadily, globally. Second, central bank digital currency, CBDC. Over 130 countries were actively developing CBDC systems by 2026. China is the furthest along, its digital yuan already processing hundreds of millions of transactions every day. But here's what makes CBDC fundamentally different from any money that has ever existed. Money can be programmed. Government aid can be issued with an expiration date, spend it or lose it. Money can be restricted to specific categories of goods, locked to certain geographic zones. And in the most extreme scenario, if someone is deemed to have violated the rules, access to their money can simply be frozen. Combine digital identity with programmable digital currency, and you have a system more integrated, more centralized, and more capable of total behavioral monitoring than anything that has ever existed in human history. Every economic action, every transaction, every purchase. Recorded, tracked, and controlled. The world is being reset. Not by natural disaster, not by accident, but by a chain of interlocking crises, each one pushing the world further toward a system that is faster, more efficient, and far more controlled than what came before.